Hello, and thank you for joining us this morning for our monthly media briefing. I look forward to reporting our September cargo volume, sharing a few forecasting data updates from the Signal, and of course, taking your questions. First, I'd like to introduce Peter Friedmann, a well-known leader in the transportation industry. Peter is in Washington, D.C., serving as the executive director of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition. Peter helped form the AgTC group back in 1987 and plays an important role in developing U.S. and international transportation policy. Peter served as counsel for the United States Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. He drafted the Ocean Shipping Act and numerous other transportation laws. Today, Peter is a strong voice for U.S. agriculture and its members. Peter, we'll hear your insights and observations in just a few minutes, but I wanted to say thank you for your time and welcome here today.
Thank you very much, Gene. It's a privilege to be there with you. And the Port of Los Angeles is so critical because nationwide, agriculture exports fuel the economy all through the country. And to export agriculture, we need containers. Nobody has more containers than the Port of Los Angeles. So we're going to discuss, as we have discussed over the past months, how we get those containers. And there's no better place to discuss that with Port of Los Angeles and with Eugene, who've been a thought leader on all these issues regarding agriculture exports. So thank you very much for including me.
Thank you, Peter, and I too look forward to our discussion. It's important to have the latest views of our cargo terminals here in Los Angeles, which is why each month I share drone footage taken by our port police for security and safety purposes. As you can see, a very busy Port of Los Angeles is shown here, and cargo is flowing. There is space available here as America continues to reemerge economically. Today, we have 16 vessels in port. 14 of the container ship variety, 1 bulk vessel, and 1 general cargo ship. Additionally, there are 11 ships at anchor in the San Pedro Bay. That includes 4 container ships, 4 tankers, 2 bulk vessels, and 1 cruise liner. Terminals are fully operational, as they have been since the emergency orders were announced in early March, with labor shifts working both day and night sides. With the increase in import cargo volume during recent months, we're using drones, Port Optimizer, the Signal data to supplement our daily engagement with supply chain partners to identify and address issues. Now, let's take a look at the September numbers. For the month, the Port of Los Angeles processed 883,625 20-foot equivalent units. That's more than a 13% increase year on year, and it is the best September in our port's 114-year history, just edging out September of 2018. It's also the conclusion of our single best business quarter, with more than 2.7 million container units moved, which surpassed quarter 4 of 2018. The monthly average in quarter number 3 this year was a little more than 900,000 TEUs. It's a big upswing from what we normally were used to seeing in the first 6 months of 2020, when we averaged a little bit more than 627,000 Ts per month. This is about a 30% increase than the run rate we witnessed in the first half of the year. In September, we welcomed 97 ship arrivals with no canceled sailings for the first time this year. We also saw 11 ad hoc or unscheduled sailings that were put in motion to meet demand. Year to date, as you well know, we have seen 66 canceled sailings and the add back of 31 additional extra loaders. So we're still only about halfway to recovering from all of those vessel visits that were canceled in the first half of the year. After our single best month just in August, I mentioned something that bears repeating. This amount of cargo volume creates some supply chain complexities that must be dealt with on a daily basis. We're working with stakeholders on the challenges that arise from an import surge like this. We've seen dwell times increase, longer turn times for our trucks, additional cargo on our tarmacs. For example, the Port Optimizer and Signal data are now showing that we can provide stakeholders additional information so they can better plan their assets and staffing. We're listening, responding, and staying nimble to the needs of our customers and our partners. The bottom line for September, after 11 consecutive months of year-on-year declines, we've now had 2 months in August and September of year-on-year comparable growth. We continue to see the replenishment of warehouse and distribution center inventories, along with retailers prepping for year-end holidays. After staying home much of the spring, consumers are buying again. Data from the National Retail Federation suggests that merchants are stocking up in anticipation of an early holiday shopping season. The breakdown of September volume follows. Imports were at nearly 472,000 container units, which is a 17% increase over last September. However, even with these past couple of months and the uptick in cargo, year-to-date 2020 imports are still down by 5%. Exports for the month came in at 130,000 plus TEUs, about flat compared to last September. But this continues a problematic trend. We've seen exports drop 22 of the past 23 months. The widening trade deficit, created largely by tensions between the U.S. and China, continues to disrupt the supply chain. Empty containers are also a function of the widening trade gap. In September, we shipped 281,000 empty container units back to Asia in an attempt to catch the next round of imports. This is more than double the amount of loaded exports that were shipped from the Port of Los Angeles in the month. Regardless of who wins the upcoming elections, our country is in desperate need of a cohesive export plan, as well as a national infrastructure program and a digitization strategy for ports across the country. Year-to-date through September, we're down about 9% compared to last year. But we have cut that deficit in nearly half since my report to you back in May. With import cargo volume strong, so are the labor shift work at our docks. Week 42, which ended on October 9th, showed a total shift count between Los Angeles and Long Beach ports of more than 50,000. This is the first time with 13 consecutive weeks of labor shift work over 40,000 since the end of 2018 and the beginning of 19. Year to date, though, in 2020, labor shift work is down 11% compared to the same time last year, and down 12% when compared to the all-important 3.5-year running average. But as you can see from this chart, this is 10 consecutive weeks now where we are above the all-important blue line, which represents that 3.5-year average. And as we've said before, more cargo means more jobs here at America's port. As I also shared last month, the Signal is a control tower view here at the Port of Los Angeles, powered by the Port Optimizer. It gives us an extended look that not too many others have right now. We can see upstream volume about 3 weeks in advance, plan staffing and the asset requirements, and prepare to give this information to the marketplace so they can be better attuned to volume that's coming here to the port. That information is available on our website, and it's also available at signal.portoptimizer.com. And as always, and committed here at the Port of Los Angeles, no proprietary data is shared. The Signal data indicates that October volume in totality is looking very strong, even with the National Holiday Week in China and scheduled closures of manufacturing facilities and ports for several days. We're currently estimating October volume to be in the range of 950,000 container units. That compares to about 770,000 just last October. Preliminary November data indicates volume above the 800,000 TEU threshold, and that also compares favorably to last November that came in at more than 729,000 TEUs. With September in the books, I'm estimating that we'll come in at about 8.9 million TEUs for the calendar year 2020. And if that's correct, it'll be a year-on-year decline of about 4%. Given all that's happened this year economically worldwide and in the United States, I'll take that for right now. We'll continue to watch macroeconomics, public health data, and political developments, all of which will have an influence on downline global trade and policy. Now, I'd like to welcome back Peter Friedmann of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Gene. If anybody understands our motivating mantra for the agriculture exporters, it's you. And that is, and it's worth repeating, there's nothing we produce in agriculture or forest products in this country that cannot be sourced somewhere else in the world. And while we may produce the best, and generally do, if we can't deliver affordably, dependably, then our foreign customers will go somewhere else. And there's no greater concentration of our foreign customers, frankly, than Asia Pacific. That is why West Coast US ports are the preferred port for people who have time-sensitive cargo to ship in agriculture and forest products. And what's not time-sensitive these days? It either perishes because it's refrigerated or it's fragile, or the customer just wants it sooner. And everybody wants it sooner in Korea, in Japan, in China, increasingly Vietnam. Those are markets. You're the closest to it. So what happens in Los Angeles and other West Coast ports reverberates all the way through the country. So whether you're in Junction City, Kansas, or in Lubbock, Texas, or in Memphis, Tennessee, all those places, Gene, and I think people watching this will know, those places depend on the efficient throughput of commerce through the port of Los Angeles and other West Coast ports. We all need, for agriculture exports, empty containers to load our exports in. And you have those empty containers. The question is, can we get them going inland to Kansas and Nebraska to pick up that valuable export cargo? Or are the ocean carriers in a hurry to get them back empty to Asia to load with golf clubs and tennis shoes and consumer electronics coming back? It's a balancing act, and that largely is reflected in the data that you and other ports have. Imports up, exports down, and exports challenged. So we're glad to work with you on addressing those.
Thank you, Peter. And to break it down in its most simplistic form, imports to the United States traditionally go to major metropolitan areas with finished goods for those of us in the consuming public. But our exports from the United States emanate from rural America. How do we square this circle of getting containers, truck and rail service aligned with the American exporter, whether they be in the agricultural sector or forestry products?
Well, one objective would be to restore the stockyards to the center of Chicago, but that isn't going to happen soon. It was that way, and it was very easy then. Chicago, a major consumer base, demand for imports for consumer goods. They would get the containers there, and then you could load the beef and so forth, the hides there and out. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened for at least 100 years. So the places I mentioned, places that most people don't know, Cordova, little towns outside of Lubbock, that's where our agriculture grows. But import cargo is coming to Los Angeles, consumed in Southern California to a huge extent. And that's why it's a very high demand location for ocean carriers to come in and for the exporters from China to go out to Southern California. But you get more cargo coming in than you consume in Southern California. That cargo goes by rail, and you've got two rail options: direct, fast, triple tracks in some cases, all the way to places like Dallas, St. Louis, Chicago, Memphis, and so forth. But again, they deliver that cargo, and they want those empty containers back. Now, here's one of the problems, and as a former president of a major steamship line, North America, that freight rates that the ocean carriers are getting for import cargo coming from Asia to the United States are 4, 5, in some cases 7 or 8 times the revenue that they get to carry our exports. Imports might be silk ties and suits and golf clubs and high-end tennis shoes. Exports are heavy and relatively low margin. They are hay, forage, say, coming from the Imperial Valley, cotton coming from Southern California and all the way across the country to Mississippi. It's all those heavy cargoes that have multiple sourcing competition around the world. So the margins, the price margins, are very thin. So they can only afford to pay so much for freight. Now, our objective is to get more of those empty containers. And I know we've discussed this, Gene. How do we get those import containers emptied and quickly to the inland points? Inland can be Bakersfield or Fresno, but it can also be Reno, and it can be points all the way to between here and Mississippi. Staple cotton in Mississippi, they want to ship cotton out through here, through Southern California. But they got to have a way to get their cargo loaded into an empty container, and we need to figure out how to get those empty containers there fast. We're working with the railroads, as I know you have. We're working to change some of their trucking laws and regulations that are outdated and inconsistent with global standards so that we can get those empty containers inland and back out. It's an ongoing challenge. It's been a challenge for 20, 30 years, and we have to figure out a way and keep pushing the ocean carriers, the railroads, to reposition empty containers to places where they're needed around the country.
Well put, Peter. And, with where we sit today over the past 2.5 years, the trade policy and what impacts it's had, we've doubled down on our focus on United States exports, trying, from our small part, to get people back on the job. And U.S. export jobs, according to the Department of Labor, pay about 17% more than jobs in other segments. All that you've said now is so true, because in the last several months, we've seen a widening of that trade gap in pure container volume over the past times that we've been looking at these stats. In normal days, it was about 2.5 imports to every 1 exports. In August, we ballooned 4 or 5 to 1. Now with the September numbers, we're about 3.5 imports for every export. Do you think digitization can get us there? We've got so many players, so many folks involved. How can we really get our hands around all of this information to drive the strategy that you've just described?
Well, as mentioned, agriculture, forest products, our exports have low profit margins. So efficiency is absolutely critical. Inefficiency, if it applies to a $180 pair of tennis shoes, might raise the price of the tennis shoes by a dime. But you raise the price of a bale of hay by a dime, you're out of the global market. They're going to go to New Zealand or Australia for the dime. Soybeans and so forth, cotton, all very sensitive. So inefficiency kills our exporters. So how do we address the inefficiency? One way is by having information. Right now, we have no central place for an exporter of agriculture to know exactly when the ocean carrier, all the way 1,500 miles to its west at a port, when its cutoff date time is going to be for the cargo. Therefore, they don't know exactly when they should load that cargo from their processing plant, if it's a sausage company in Wisconsin, for example, when they should finish the processing, when they should have the trucker there, when that trucker should drive to the railhead, when the railroad should take it. Will that railroad get all the way on dock, or does it have to go to a cold storage facility? All these moving parts. So right now, it's a guess. And then you guess, you're going to be wrong often. So you're going to have a truck waiting an extra day or two, and that costs money. You're going to miss the rail move. That's going to cost money because you're waiting at a rail ramp in the Midwest. The railroad might bring it on time, or they might bring it early, or they might bring it late. They may miss the ship. The ship, then it sits there and you pay demurrage. All those things dramatically cut into the ability, not just the profitability, just the ability to continue to export. So if we had a central place where one can see all that arrival information from all those modes that I just mentioned, all their transit times, all their locations in one portal, then we can eliminate a lot of inefficiency. And you've started, I think you're in the lead of the country in trying to develop a portal for your whole port. And what better and yet more challenging place to do it than at the biggest port in the country? You should have picked a little fishing village somewhere up the coast. It would be easier. But you are tackling the problem. You've got the containers, you've got the vessels, you've got the rail connections and the truck and the highway. But you are trying to develop a central portal where somebody can go right in and see arrival and departures and where the containers are, where the trucks need to be, where the chassis are, all in one place. We need it in Los Angeles. We need it nationwide. That would solve a lot of our problems.
Very good, thanks. And one more touch point before we move to the next segment, Peter. We've got to have everybody rowing in the same direction, and I'm really of the opinion that whether it's the soy and specialty grains, AgTC, Midwest shippers from Minneapolis, a lot of us have worked together for a long time, and we are pulling in the same direction. But in addition to that, what type of trade policy do we need to grow exports in the country?
The first one we need is a predictable trade policy. It takes a while for a hog to be birthed, to grow, and go through the feedlots and so forth. That doesn't happen instantly. And you can't shut these things off right away. You can stop production of an apparel factory or even an electronics factory in China. You can stop it if you have to. You can't stop the cows from growing. You can't stop the soybeans from growing. You have to plan a year and a half in advance whether you're even going to start the process. But once it's started, it's going to continue. And so if there's no predictability, there's going to be a lot of losses, a lot of damages. And that's what we felt, for example, with the pork industry. So we need predictability. We need predictability of markets. We had for many years, Korea would not take our fresh pork, probably the highest value agriculture export, and one that has to move fast, because if it's going to be delivered fresh, so shelf life in Korea in the supermarkets, it's got to go the most direct way. Most direct way is through a West Coast port. You can't take another route. You have to go through a West Coast port. You got to go generally Los Angeles, Long Beach, and then straight in, right? Now, once that market was opened by the U.S. Trade Representative some years ago, about 4 years ago, that was a great thing. Now people could plan. But the very worst thing that happened is if that market closes. Now, and then what do you do with all this fresh pork and the pork growing and the whole supply chain? That throws it all in disruption. And we've had that in China over the years. We've had that here in the U.S. with sometimes our foreign customers are living in countries that are playing games with phytosanitary controls to protect their own industries or some other objectives. But to the extent that our government can work to consistency, predictability, and without these huge whipsaw changes that we've suffered under in the last few years, the more likely we'll be able to continue to grow exports.
We're talking with Peter Friedmann, Executive Director of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition. Well put, Peter. I'll dish it back to Philip Sandfield so we can move to the next segment of Q&A with our media who has joined us today. Philip?
Thank you, Gene. We got several questions from various media, all directed to you, Gene, on this topic. With volumes at both Los Angeles and Long Beach at extremely high levels, what can be done to relieve vessel congestion, and do you expect these conditions to persist beyond the September-October restocking period?
Yeah, great question, and I'll answer it the way I've been answering this question. We're busy. You go to LAX the day before Thanksgiving, the airport's going to be busy. Same for Boston Logan. We don't have vessel congestion, but what we see are segments that continue to need refinement. These ships are bigger than ever. Our exchange rate, as I pointed to last month in our media update, was above 10,800 TEUs per vessel, a record anywhere in the world. It takes time to process that cargo. Now we're seeing dwell times increase on the street due to COVID-19 requirements and trying to take care of our workers' health and safety every day. You don't see as much staffing at each shift at our warehouses and distribution centers. It takes longer to process import cargo at those facilities. With more import cargo, this has become a one-way trade. As Peter stated, and I reported in the numbers, exports are down due to a lack of a national trade policy, primarily so far. That puts a lot of stress on the asset service providers, whether they're truckers, Western railroads, or short-line PHL right here in Los Angeles and Long Beach. All of that puts extreme stress on the process itself. What we have to do going forward is look for a better balance of trade that can help reduce costs and make us a more attractive gateway. But for the here and now, we're looking 3 weeks upstream to see what's coming at us through the signal. We have a great line of sight on what needs to be trucked out to the Inland Empire, what needs to be trucked to near dock rail facilities, and what containers are going to be loaded on dock so we can get that extra time of preparation. Same goes for U.S. Customs, our longshore labor groups, and others, so they know how they need to staff. We'll continue to work through this. Cargo is at elevated levels. Please remember, we're not going to ball games. We're not going to the movies or the opera. We're buying products. Whether we're going to our big box retailers or we're shopping online, those goods need to be replenished. And with Amazon Day yesterday, that started an online sales process for the holidays that begins a little bit earlier than we're accustomed to. So we'll keep chipping away at the day-to-day. We need our truck community to show up for appointments. We're encouraging dual transactions, and we need a progressive chassis solution that feeds into the digitization concept the Port Optimizer brings. We're working all out, but there are opportunities for continued improvement. Thanks for the collective group question.
Thank you, Gene. A reminder to the media that if you do have a question, please type it into the Q&A section at the bottom right of your screen. We have received numerous questions in advance. This one is directed at Peter Friedmann. It's from Stas Margaronis of the American Journal of Transportation. Earlier this year, Peter, you warned that Burlington Northern and UP rail rates from the Midwest to U.S. West Coast ports were considerably higher than Canadian rail rates from the Midwest to the ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert. Does your coalition believe U.S. West Coast ports should encourage the BNSF and UP to lower rail rates and increase rail service frequency so as to better support U.S. farmers exporting their products abroad?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an excellent question because it's an ongoing challenge. And lifting off what I was talking about how we get, and what Gene was talking about, how to get containers from a population center, whether it's Los Angeles or maybe at a destination like Chicago or Memphis, to the rural places in America where they're needed. That requires repositioning of containers, empty containers generally, to rural spots. Who repositions them? The railroads. So rail rates not only impact the cost of moving an agriculture export from its origin to, say, a West Coast port of Los Angeles. That's one move, which is already $400, $500, $600 more expensive than moving the equivalent cargo from Manitoba, say, to Port of Vancouver, British Columbia. So you're already at a disadvantage bringing that cargo out. But the repositioning of the containers as people in Junction City scramble all over the country to find empty reefer containers and have them repositioned 500, 600, 700 miles by rail, that's expensive. And so that higher rail cost here in the United States permeates our whole supply chain. And so that is one of our very significant challenges that we deal with. It's one of the reasons, frankly, we're trying to increase allowable truck weights in this country to match what the Canadians allow and what the rest of the world allows. We have the lowest allowable truck weights in the world here in the United States. We would be happy to move more cargo on the railroads if the railroads could be more price competitive so that we, our agriculture exporters in this country, can be price competitive with our competitors who are sourcing in Canada and elsewhere. At the same time, let me give kudos to the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. For today, they have begun an inland intermodal rail facility in a place where it's needed in rural America, in Minot, North Dakota, which has desperately needed rail service for a long time. And we hope that's a harbinger for more inland rail depots established by the Union Pacific, by the Burlington Northern. There's opportunities to do so in California and throughout rural America. It will help a lot.
Thank you, Peter. This next question comes from Niraj at the New York Times, and it's directed at Gene. Are there any standout categories of goods that drove the import surge last month or in recent months, or is this across the board?
Thanks, Niraj, and appreciate you joining us again today. It's across the board, but look at the categories of folks who have been open during this pandemic. The big box retailers, the home improvement stores, the hardware stores, and those with which we're buying goods online that continue to progress their business. There have been huge spikes in athletic wear, athleisure wear. We're trying to do more exercise either in our home or outdoors where it's safe, not necessarily in gyms. We've seen the replenishment of staples that continue to come through that we need. We're taking care of our cars better. So there are a number of categories that have done well, and as we head into the holiday season, you'll see toys and electronics and other products in a variety of areas like that continuing to move through the supply chain.
Thank you. Peter, this question comes from Paul Avery at World Cargo News. Where in the United States does the AgTC believe a transload facility for loading bulk agricultural products could be built to connect the supply of agricultural products to the flow of empty containers heading back to Los Angeles? Would AgTC members be willing to support the investment required for such a transloading facility? And have AgTC members considered buying their own containers or working with one of the leasing companies to have them manage a dedicated fleet for agricultural exports?
Thank you. That's a lot of questions in there and very timely as well. When we talk about agriculture, so much used to go and still does by bulk, in barges, in big, huge bulk vessels, by rail in unit trains of hopper cars that are just, the product is just poured right in. That is rapidly continuing to change into something that's much more convenient for our consumers, the customers overseas. They don't want a huge ship load, they want a container load. 40 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot is a lot of whatever agriculture, that's sufficient. People don't want more, but they want it in a container. So that those cargoes are being shifted, bulk cargoes, into containers. And there's transload facilities all up and down the West Coast, including Los Angeles, to transload bulk into containers so they can go out. Now, where would you put those locations? You have to put them essentially in places where it's too far to truck economically. So that's why, say, Minot is a good location because the alternative is trucking trucking to Seattle, Tacoma, or trucking to Chicago, or maybe Minneapolis to the extent there might be rail service that suits you from there. But those are hundreds of miles. It's non-economic, so you got to find places. I know there's been exploration of places in the Central Valley, places that are maybe equidistant between Oakland and LA Long Beach. LA and Long Beach have an advantage in that that's where those are the first port of calls for import cargo. So that's where the empty containers are. The question is, how do you get your cargo to those empty containers, or the empty containers to your cargo? And I know the Union Pacific had a number of years ago been working with the ports to perhaps establish a load point further inland in Yermo in California. There are locations in Nebraska you could do it. There are various locations around the country, and we started developing an inventory of those locations. There are places in Oregon where you could do it, and a lot of that would be very good to funnel cargo all the way down to LA Long Beach, frankly, or Oakland, as well as up to Seattle, Tacoma. So there are locations where it is, we believe, economic if the railroads desire it and if they believe it is economic to stop and load midpoint. For so much of our imports, the railroads are simply used to hauling them from the port here on the West Coast all the way to the middle of the country without stopping in between. Unfortunately, that just doesn't work for our agriculture exports. But the railroads know, and they are starting to consider inland load points. Burlington Northern established a very good one to handle reefer protein, that's beef, pork, in Kansas City area. They did that a couple of years ago. I mentioned Minot. There are opportunities, and we're continuing to encourage the railroads to pursue them. In terms of containers that are shipper-owned containers, it is attractive, but I might even turn that back to Gene as a former president, North America, for a major steamship line. But from the shipper perspective, we got to always remember, international trade is two-way. The supply chain is two-way. As we've been talking about today, that import container carrying golf shoes coming in is going to go out, we hope, carrying corn syrup, cotton, rice, carrying that cargo out. Now, once that cargo goes out on that container, it's going to go someplace into Asia and China. It's going to be offloaded somewhere inland China. It's going to have to be moved to some production facility in China and loaded with import cargo coming to the US. It's not, so it may be an agricultural company that theoretically owns the container, but it's only carrying agricultural goods of that company one way. And on the way back, who knows what cargo is going in, and perhaps that's the reason it doesn't work. Gene may have more insight.
Yeah, we get into the nuances all the time, Peter, myself, a number of us in the supply chain business, but it's all about asset velocity and round trip economics. If we can keep cargo in these containers as they move from Asia to the US and then US back, that is the first step. And if we have to go to the next level of triangulated economics, think in your mind's eye of an import container that's going to Chicago. Some of that product may be needed at a store in Peoria. Run that domestically, then pick up some machinery or agriculture products in downstate Illinois and ship it back to Asia, keeping that container loaded and allowing the cargo owner to make decisions on what gateway to use, how to get trucking service, and align with rail and shipping schedules is the key. We need this machine learning to think faster than the human so we can start piecing all of these ideas together. But it's the round trip and triangulate economics that are going to make the most sense.
Thank you Thank you both. We have time for a couple more questions. Gene, Lisa Bartline from Reuters asks a two-part question. We'll start with the first. Are there enough cargo ships in operation now to meet demand for U.S. ports? Are these shipping lines bringing more ships into service? And if so, where are those ships coming from?
Yeah, there's a flex in capacity, and we saw, Lisa, as you covered so closely in the first half of this year, the drawdown in ship services due to the lack of demand. And it was a real pendulum effect as we had predicted. China shut down because of the infection rate of the coronavirus that they witnessed dating back to January and the Lunar New Year holiday. Shortly after they started to bolster up their manufacturing community, we shut down here in the United States. So the capacity had to be laid up. It had to be moved to hot anchor. As demand picked up here in the United States that we've witnessed in 1, 2, and now the third wave of strong imports, that ship capacity has come back online. I think the industry can continue to do a good job at flexing that capacity as best as they have the ability to understand what demand is going to be. And this is where digitization really comes in. From the order cycle process, the purchase order of that merchandiser at the big box retailer who knows 90, maybe 120 days out before a vessel even sails Asia, how much product she needs to bring in. And if we can weave that into these broader port community systems and digitization programs, we'll get a little bit sharper on how we forecast, plan capacity, and then staffing here on the ground for landside services.
Thank you, Gene. The second part of Lisa's question is, are you seeing evidence of stockpiling by U.S. importers, either due to concerns about a flare-up in COVID or civic or unrest around the U.S. election?
Not so much at this point. We did see that, Lisa, as you remember, and also we discussed back in March of 2018 when the Section 301 and 232 tariffs went into place. We did see American importers start to stockpile certain commodities ahead of new tariff milestones to avoid the taxation on American companies through the trade policy. But not so much right now. Again, we're not spending a lot of money on services as American consumers. We're buying the retail good itself. So this replenishment scheme is really working overtime to get that product back and inventories up to levels that the retailers need. Also, as I mentioned, you see a little bit earlier shopping maybe for the holiday seasons. A lot of us are working from home. We sure are buying online more than we had normally been accustomed to. So watching those demand signals is key for the import community right now.
Thank you, Gene. The last question we have time for comes from Kim Link Wills at FreightWaves, and she asks if there are any lessons that can be learned from the CMA CGM ransomware attack.
Kim, we're learning every day. And you may remember here at the Port of Los Angeles back in September of 2014, we opened up the nation's first cybersecurity operations center. Today, that center at the Port of Los Angeles is stopping more than 40 million cyber intrusion attempts per month, and that's double what it was pre-COVID. And for that reason, and what we saw with the NotPetya attack in Eastern Europe that impacted some of our partners that utilize the Port of Los Angeles, the impact that the Port of Long Beach had at one of its terminals, we decided in partnership with our stakeholder groups and customers to lift off the first cybersecurity resilience center. And it's one that brings in the broader ecosystem with a sense of anonymity. So we're not impacting those who have been penetrated by these cyber attacks, but bringing in folks to say, I just saw this, I'm sharing it with everybody else in the community. Using the port as a clearinghouse for information on what the bad guys are doing and getting it out to the commercial marketplace quicker. But it is a deep partnership between the private and public sector that really needs to catch hold here. So the lessons that we've learned, again, the cyber training from an employee level all the way through our industry. You see an email from somebody you don't know, don't open it up. Don't click on unknown attachments. All the way through to what our experts are doing, who are ISO 27001 certified with ongoing training and education. Bringing more people into this discussion at the federal, state, and local level has also been paramount to our learning experience. We're not there yet. There's still much more work to do, but proud of the effort on the ground and the expertise and leadership that we have around our industry. And mind you, the recent event with CMA CGM did not impede the flow of cargo. We were looking through the port optimizer at the rail and truck gate activity, the ship's loading and discharge, and all the numbers continued unimpeded. They had to go to a manual process at times. They had to go to business contingency planning with their partners. That's all part and parcel of what we're taught and what we're coached to do in times like this.
Gene and Peter, thank you so much. Gene, if you'd like to close out by saying, thanking Peter and then make any concluding remarks.
Sure, thanks, Philip. And again, Peter Friedmann, Executive Director, Agriculture Transportation Coalition, a colleague for many years, and whose members really rely on what we do in the supply chain. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon, Eastern Time, back in our nation's capital. Beyond the monthly operational updates that we discuss and share each month, I'd like to provide a few thoughts about the COVID-19 pandemic. Our hearts go out to the families and loved ones of the more than 216,000 people who have died in the United States alone due to COVID-19. So many of us have been affected. The amount of loss and suffering this virus has brought is staggering. Here at the port, through our Logistics Victory Los Angeles effort, we have been hard at work marshaling our city's logistics and purchasing capabilities in an all-out effort to speed personal protective equipment to our medical and frontline workers. To date, we have distributed more than 2.9 million units of personal protective equipment and other supplies to 36 Los Angeles area hospitals and 122 skilled nursing facilities. We have delivered more than 1.4 million N95 masks made by the Honeywell Corporation direct to local hospitals at cost, no markup, no margin. And over the next 18 months, we'll ship out almost 23 million more. Thousands more gloves, masks, and gallons of hand sanitizer that have been donated to Love LA have in turn been given to hospitals and frontline workers in and around the port complex and beyond. There's so much more work to do on this front, but we're committed to continuing our efforts as long as necessary. As we think about all the work we do every day at the Port of Los Angeles during these challenging times, all the cargo that we move, all the jobs that are tied to our operations, we are particularly grateful that in a small way we're able to play a role in protecting the health and safety of our nation's workforce and our medical frontline experts. Thank you all again for your interest in our business joining here today, and please stay safe and healthy.